All right, everybody. Welcome to the Craft plugin development live stream webinar thing. I'm Ryan Irelan, and I'm going to kind of be in a little bit of the hot seat today. I got Andrew Welch here of NY Studio 107. If you've used SEO add-ons in Craft, you probably know Andrew from SEO-matic. He's got other things. What's the image one you have, Andrew?
Image Optimize for Craft.
Image Optimize. You could also, or if you have Googled for something about about Craft, thanks. Now you fed that to my brain. If you have Googled something about Craft, you might have come upon Andrew's blog. It's at nystudio107.com/blog. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it. And that's a nice nexus. I mean, one of the reasons you find it on Google all the time is in part, some of the SEO that's on there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So last week I was chatting with Andrew about a plugin that I had created, and I was thinking about making it publicly available. So I was working on just taking it from being a plugin that I built specifically for a project and making it so it was usable to people outside of that project. And so I was really talking about things like settings, like what's the best way to make this, plugin configurable by just anybody on any Craft website. And we got to chatting about some approaches, and that there's a lot of discussion about that. And we decided to do this informal chat and a little bit of show and tell about plugin development. And we're going to stick to a lot of fundamentals and kind of big picture stuff, but we may have an opportunity for to drop into some code too. We'll just see how it goes. We want this to be as helpful to as many people as possible. So we probably won't be getting too far in the weeds here.
You never know.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And
I apologize, Ryan. It's kind of our first date, and I didn't even shave, man.
Oh, well, yeah. I actually shaved this morning.
There you go. See, but this right here, you can tell I'm fully employed right now. Right.
Right.
If I, as a freelancer or contractor, if I was seeking work, I'd be, neatly shaved. I'd have a nice button-down shirt on. But this is the fully employed look right here.
Yeah. Now, the only reason I shaved this morning is actually not for you, Andrew. It was because I have a dentist appointment after this, and so I just thought I would.
I'm just gonna believe you did it for me. Okay.
All right. So we're gonna. So this is what we're gonna cover. We're gonna talk about why and when, the bigger picture stuff, like why and when you want to create a plugin for Craft. The easiest way to start your first plugin if you haven't created one. And really want to try to demystify the plugin creation process to where maybe we can give people that haven't created one a couple ideas of easy ways to get started. And then the bigger part of the discussion will be moving from what I call a project plugin to a public plugin. And if you've created a plugin, you know what that's like, where half the stuff in it's hard coded specifically to the project, just to get it to work. And then you have to really, take all that away and abstract that out into settings or refactor it so that it is appropriate for any project.
Yeah, now with Craft 3, we might even be talking about not creating a plugin at all.
Right? Because of the availability of the services, right, in the templates? Is that what you're talking about?
From the availability of, you basically get, for all intents and purposes, you get all of craft.app in your templates. But also, from the point of view of Craft modules, and we can get into that as well. But I think Craft modules are really gonna sort of be the death of the per project plugin, because there's no necessarily reason to have a plugin in those instances. But we'll get all to that's kind of down the road.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We'll check that out. And then also, if we have time, we'll touch on Craft 2 to Craft 3. So going, everybody's. One of the reasons that you're seeing SEO-matic isn't available yet is because everybody's having to redo their plugins to support Craft 3. There's
that's not the only reason.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, they already be.
I've been really busy. That's not the only reason, but yeah.
But it's but there's a lot of work, so there's not things that are already not everything is available for Craft 3 that has been available for Craft 2. So we'll talk about that. And the two plugins that I have that I wanted to share, I have one for Craft 2 and one for Craft 3, just in case we need to talk through that. All right, so a little bit of, so that's like the who we are and what we're going to cover. A little bit of not behind the scenes, but like housekeeping stuff. So there is a, if you're here on Zoom, there is a chat that you can get access to. And you can chat here. You can drop a message to everybody. There's also a Q&A option too, where you can throw in a question. If you rather just have it hit myself and Andrew, you can drop that in. And you can ask that anonymously or with your name. And you can drop that in the Q&A. It's a great way to if you want to just load up a question for us for later. What else? I'm recording this, so if you're not able to stay the whole time, or if you want to go back and revisit it later, it is being recorded, and I will put it up most likely on the YouTube channel and on my site as well at majingo.com. And I think that is it. There's going to be some polls that'll pop up. I just put in one. I'm going to end it right now for whether you've created a plugin for Craft. Looks like we're at about 59% no and 41% yes.
Wow, that's actually more yeses than I thought.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's everybody's here for you then. Those 41%.
They're going to be disappointed.
All right, so let's jump into the first topic, which is more sort of bigger picture, which is when and why to create a plugin. So I'll just start with a story for one of the plugins that we're going to talk about, which you can see here, if everybody can see my screen, which you should be able to, is I have this plugin here called Contact Form Plus. This is just one of them. This is a Craft 2 plugin. So basically the thing here is I'm using the basic contact form that Pixel and Tonic created, the first party plugin. And that just shoots an email off. There's no like saving of it. And my needs for the project that I built this for didn't really require something as like awesome and robust as Freeform. Like it really didn't require any of that, like those extra features. So I didn't need that. I kind of needed something in between. I really just wanted to save the contact form submission into Craft. And I really wanted it to be just like as native as possible, so I didn't have to do a lot of extra stuff. So it just saves it as a section. Saves it as an entry in a section. And this was born out of just a project that I was working on where I just needed this robust, or I needed a more robust contact form. We had a problem where some stuff wasn't being sent, and it caused some problems because there were people that needed that access to that information that was being sent. So it was just kind of more of like making that contact form a little bit more robust. So
yeah, so you're just adding the ability to save the submission.
That's it. Yeah, and it just uses an event, right. So I'm just able to just, on before send, it just basically saves and then sends. So that's kind of like why I typically create plugins now. I've not ever created one for commercial use, and I have a feeling that probably more people create them one-off for projects than they do like as some sort of like commercial venture or anything like that.
Oh yeah, no, I can guarantee you, like just from running the plugin factory website, I can definitely tell you that the number of plugins that are generated from there versus the number that are actually available somewhere live, it's pretty huge.
Yeah. So so that's like the when and why for my situation. But Andrew, what would be some other situations where the when and why would come up in terms of, like, have you run into something where you've had to quickly like spin up something for to solve a specific problem?
Yeah. So, I mean, my kind of perspective on this is that I've been doing software for a really, really long time. So I'm like, my brain is already there in terms of like how to turn something into a project. Like, in other words, I'm facing this one specific thing that I need to do, but then how could that be thought of in a broader context that could solve not just that problem for this project, but then maybe it could solve that problem a little bit more abstractly for every project that I do, or any project that needs, this kind of functionality in it. And then where you go from there is, well, oh, if this is something that is general enough that it can solve the problem for just about every site that I do, why not make it something that everyone can use, and I can even generalize it a little bit further? I mean, we could all sit down and make a website today by opening up like TextEdit or Notepad and banging out some HTML and putting it up on a server, and there's a website, right? But we're using Craft, or a lot of us are using Craft as a basis to then build this website on, right? And we're doing that because it gives us a bunch of functionality that either we can't replicate, or it'd be just a ton of work to try to replicate that, right? And I think the reason, or the time to make a plugin, is when there's a similar thing where Craft isn't doing something that you need it to be able to do. And the only way to make that happen is to extend it via a plugin, or it's something that maybe you can do in Craft, but it's a real pain in the butt to try and replicate it every time. So for instance, a lot of the SEO stuff that is in, or was in the original SEO-matic, it's stuff that I was already doing in Craft, right? I mean, I had a whole system where I had variables that were here and they were overridden there, and you could do pretty much all of that stuff, and you can even do like the JSON LD. Like you can do all of that in the templates. But even me, where I was doing it for myself, it was a pain in the butt to replicate it and to do it for every project that I was working on. So I said, all right, this is a perfect thing. And it's also kind of isolated enough that it can be broken off into its own individual thing. This is a perfect candidate to make a plugin, right? It's something that can be done manually, but it's a whole lot of work to do it manually. And then there are also some things that it makes a lot easier to do. But that's just sort of my general approach when I'm looking at, should this thing be a plugin? Is it something that, as a plugin, it's going to save me time? I mean, it's really what this all boils down to, right? You can spin up a new site, you can do all of the SEO yourself, or you can install a plugin, right? And you're trading off time that was done in a generalized way with the plugin that does all of that stuff for you, versus the specific case where you're kind of just writing it all yourself and are replicating it all. So I kind of look at a good time to make a plugin is when I've got some functionality that is significant enough that I don't want to have to replicate it every time, and that ultimately it's going to save me time. If I have to bill a client 10 hours for hand coding the SEO on the site, I would much rather just either get a free plugin or buy a plugin, install it, and be done.
Right.
And then I'm also not having to maintain all of that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say, the big picture thing again is just, if you have compartmentalized functionality, stuff that you can, a problem that you're facing, and then maybe you think about it more from a forest view than a tree view, and it can be pulled out and generalized, and it's something that you would be using in a number of places. I mean, that's a perfect time to make it into a plugin, either to save you personally time in doing it, or if you're going to release it to everybody, to save everybody time, or maybe even sell it if it's good enough.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of like you're talking about SEO-matic, I like some of like what you do with SEO-matic could, or probably almost all of it, could be like recreated in some way with fields and template code. And of course, the idea here is that like every site that you would make you would have to build that up again.
Right. That's true. But the other thing is, and I actually think that this is one of the one of the most useful things for not just SEO-matic, but a lot of these plugins is that a lot of the work that has gone into, and I'll talk about this plugin in particular, but I think any plugin, is someone getting their head around what the problem is and discovering all of this stuff, right? So if you wanted to replicate this stuff, actually doing all of the fields and all that kind of stuff would only be a small percentage of the work, right? The bulk of the work is knowing what modern SEO is, knowing what fields are required, knowing, you know, what JSON LD is and what types there are and where to use it. Like the whole gathering and bundling up of information is the bulk of the work for something like this. And it can be for a lot of the other plugins too. So it's not just the time it saves you from a rote, you know, what does it take to put the fields out? It's the time that it takes you to really do a deep dive in a specific domain and figure all that stuff out, you know?
Right.
Like other plugins like Imager, for instance, you know, Andre has gone in and figured out all the stuff that you might want to do with images, and you can just then use it, and you don't have to spend the amount of time and research that he did to figure all that out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so I also think about other like plugins that there was one that Marion did for, oh man, what was it again?
She might be here.
Is Marion here?
I don't know.
We should, if she's here, we should bring her up as a panelist, because it's the, oh man, what was it? It wasn't for Switch, but it was something like related.
The perversion one?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like there's other things that like that are more like, you know, code related for making code easier. So like a lot of what we see is stuff that you install and is like configured via the Craft control panel.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all sorts of other things. Trying to think of what else.
So another generalized example. So a plugin that I used on every site was a free plugin called Typography.
Okay.
And that's essentially, so we use things like Imager and Image Optimize to client proof that when the client uploads a 4 gigabyte PNG as the hero image, that's not what we actually display. Well, Typography, what it does is it will take the text that they wrote and it will convert everything to printer's quotes, for instance. So you get those nice curly quotes on it.
Mm-hmm.
It will put in hyphenation. It will do, all that kind of good stuff. And again, that's the kind of thing where it provides some really, really useful functionality. And then also someone spent a ton of time understanding typography and knowing what kind of things look good and what kind of functionality should be in there. So that's another kind of perfect case for a plugin. And, can you replicate that yourself? I mean, maybe, but you probably don't want to,
Right.
I mean, we're all working on these projects and we have Craft as a basis, and that gives us a great head start on doing stuff. But then there are other things, and website development these days has gotten so, like, you've got to be really, really good, right? So we can use all the help that we can get in terms of plugins that kind of raise the bar in terms of where we're starting at when we're building it. And I love the fact that when I start a new project, like, believe me, I'm not even just saying that because I wrote SEO-matic. I love the fact that I can start a new website, install SEO-matic, wire a couple things up, and I just don't have to worry about it. And the same thing with images and with the text from Typography and all that stuff. It really, the plugins give us a nice basis on which we can build our awesome stuff,
Yeah, that's been my experience with the Feed Me plugin.
Yep.
Is that I have used that to migrate a lot of content, and it saves me from having to write those migration scripts.
Right.
You still have to get.
What you could do, but you don't want to.
I don't want to do that.
No.
Like, I still had to do a lot of like massaging of data to get it in like a form that could actually even be ingested by Feed Me.
Right.
And like, that's where the work should be, right? Like, there's no magic there. Like at some point you have to take something very old and make it acceptable to something that's new, which would be Witchcraft. But just those mechanics of like mapping fields and stuff like that, like, yeah, there's no reason to do that all from scratch if it's already there. So Uh,
And I like to think about some of this stuff from like a food perspective, right? Like if you're going to cook yourself dinner, you could just kind of like randomly throw stuff together, but it's nice to right, but it's nice to have a recipe that you know that every time that you put these ingredients in and then you follow this procedure that you're going to get this thing out on the other end that you enjoy, right?
right.
And there are other, even if you cook everything at home, there are certain products that you're going to buy. Like, yes, you could, if you really wanted to, you could grow your own peanut plants. You could pick all the peanuts. You could mash them up. You could mix it with whatever you wanted. And then you'd have the peanut butter that you can use to put on the sandwich. But it's a whole hell of a lot more convenient to just go to the store, grab a jar of peanut butter, spread it on a piece of toast. And that is kind of what a plugin is. You know what I mean? Like it's encapsulating this stuff that, yeah, you could do it, but you know, who has the time for that really?
Yeah. I actually grow my own peanuts, but it just happens to be a
Hey,
specialty.
if that's your thing, it's your thing. That's all. Free range peanuts. I'm all for it.
Yeah. Let's give people like some more advice on creating plugins instead of sort of like the big picture stuff, like just getting started. So I'm coming from the point of view where I am not I'm not developing plugins like full time. It's not my job. I have like plugins. I've developed plugins for other systems. I have some craft stuff up on GitHub, but it's never been like a focus. I don't consider myself particularly like good at it. You know, I can like solve the problem and then figure out the way to implement that solution. You know, like I know how to break down, you know, problems and solve them. But
well, I think that is probably the most important part of it.
Right, that's true.
For real.
It's understanding what the problem is and what are the steps to get there.
Yeah. And that's an interesting, like you're kind of making a point that I think I hear a lot, which is you'll have web developers, and then maybe they have picked up some JavaScript, right? And they'll say, oh, you know, the PHP, I don't know anything about it. Or plugin development, you know, oh, that's just not what I do or whatever. The skills that you have when you're breaking down a problem, as you just mentioned, are the most important thing. And the actual way that you bang that out in terms of the language matters a whole lot less. Now, that isn't to say that there won't be, you know, a little bit of learning, you know, whatever. But honestly, like once you've learned one or two computer languages, you kind of know how to think about things so that when you go to pick up a new language, you're like, oh, you know, they're all kind of solving the same problem. They're just doing it a little bit differently. So you're able to pick it up pretty quickly. So it's just like the specific details, right? I mean, I liken it to, let's say you live in New York City. I know you don't now, but you live in New York City. Maybe you're a masochist, so you drive around there. You drive around New York City. You're very comfortable driving around New York City, right? You know how to drive. You know how that all works. Suddenly you're transported to Tokyo and you're supposed to drive around, right? It's going to be frustrating at first, right? Because you don't know where anything is. Maybe you can't read the signs, you know, whatever. But you still have the fundamental core skills of knowing how to drive and knowing how to navigate and how to get places. You can learn all the rest of that. And the reason I'm saying all this is I just want to stress to people that if you are, you know, at least somewhat comfortable writing stuff in JavaScript, you can write a plugin. You know, don't think that there's any kind of big barrier here. Yes, there will be new stuff to learn. However, you already have the most important skills that you need to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's if you're breaking it down to like, I'm starting with this and I have to get here and what are the steps? And a lot of times it's just like data manipulation. Like you're just, you know, saying I have to take this thing I'm getting, let's say it's a form submission and I need to do this to it and then get it here, whether that's output or save it to a database.
Right.
Or whatever. It's like an analogy drinking game. There you go. So I just dropped in a poll just so we can get an idea of how people have learned or are learning about plugin development.
I can actually check the Mojingo course video.
Yes, yeah. Put that up there.
Panelists can't vote.
Oh, did I not include? Sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
It doesn't
All
matter.
right. So I want to have a plugin. Like I decided that I have to like solve this problem, or I'm tired of writing out like
Right.
the same type of code, and I really want to have it a little bit easier. So I decided that I want to write a plugin. Like how do people get started? What I did first was I started looking at other people's plugins
Yep.
that I felt like were not solving the same problem, but maybe in the same area. Like let's say they were outputting something. Then I'm like, okay, like how are they doing this? And I would start to kind of try to reverse engineer like what they're doing and understand it. And of course, I'll admit I do that first before I look at the documentation, because I just like to see things applied first before I read about them. So what was your, like when you first started learning? I know you have more. So Andrew had like a whole nother life in Mac software development, like
and photography.
Oh, and so yeah, so like he has a whole nother like software development life. So, but Andrew, if you can kind of distill it down to like when you started working with Craft and you wanted to create your first plugin, like do you recall like what the process was?
Yeah. So I got dragged into the whole web dev world by accident from a friend of mine who runs a business, and he wanted a website built, and I'm like, how hard could it be? Right? So, and this was in 2013. I didn't even know what a div was. Like literally did not know what a div was. Had no idea. So I built the site, and then I, through that, I ended up actually really enjoying some of that stuff, and eventually found Craft. And the first plugin that I ever made, what I remember from the experience is that I was really annoyed. And the reason why I was really annoyed was they had a very, very particular naming system for, like, the controller had to be named plugin name _ uppercase, blah, 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 camel case this. And if you did anything wrong, like, it just didn't work. Right. And, the result was just, Craft can't find it, doesn't work. So that I found really frustrating. And that actually, like, very soon after, and I still wrote a couple of plugins anyway, but very soon after that is when I started building the plugin factory. And I did that primarily initially it was for me, right? And I'll get into what all that is. So originally I started building a Yeoman generator. And a Yeoman generator is basically this thing where you can start a new project and it will build all the scaffolding for you, right? And I thought it was a perfect fit for creating Craft CMS plugins, because I didn't want to deal with all this naming nonsense, right? I just wanted to generate the scaffolding that I needed, put in the bits of code to make it work, and then kind of go with it. So I wrote it as a Yeoman generator, and it worked great. But, the thing was that expecting people to install Yeoman, like, it just wasn't going to happen. Like, I realized that people just weren't going to use it, even though I found it really convenient. So I decided to build the pluginfactory.io, and it's just the website is actually just kind of a UX into the Yeoman generator. So when you fill stuff in there, you do whatever you're going to do. When you hit submit, it actually sends that to the Yeoman generator, and that builds all the scaffolding for you and all that stuff. So that is where I would start. If I were someone that wanted to build a plugin, I think you made an excellent suggestion that look at some other plugin code that's out there, like see who has written it. And even to this day, when I am working on something, if I don't know how to do something, the first thing I do is I look at how Pixel and Tonic did it, right? I see how they did it. But looking at other plugins and how they work is a great way to kind of get a handle on it. And then when you have some idea of what you might need, go to the plugin factory, generate the scaffolding, you will at the very least get a plugin that works, right? It's going to work until you type something in there, right?
Right.
I can't guarantee, whatever code you put in there, but it generates all of this kind of stuff for you, and then you can fill it in and do stuff with it. And honestly, that's the way that I would suggest getting started with it. And of course, that's very biased, but I built all this stuff so that I didn't have to make sure that I named everything right,
Exactly.
and so that if I wanted another piece, I can just add it. And even after you generate something from Plugin Factory, if you do have the generator installed locally, you can just add, like, let's say you decide you really want a console command, you can just add it, and it will generate just that file and stuff it in there. So, I mean, that's where I would start. And I would definitely also start by looking at other people's code. That can be really good or really bad. Well, I mean, I would encourage people to, just to always look at everything with a critical eye, but to be open to like doing things like perhaps a less than optimal way when you start out, and not worry about making it like perfect or exactly like whatever the best practice is right away. Just, the initial goal should always be like, can I actually get this thing working? And then there's always time to go back and refactor and learn a better way of doing it. And that's actually kind of like what I want to get into when we start looking at my stuff is like, how can I like make some of this better? But up on the screen, I have the Craft CMS plugin topic or tag on GitHub. And if you go to that, you can actually, not everybody has tagged it like this, but if you can get a nice list of plugins. Of course, there's the plugin store in Craft 3, which is of course where you can search everything that's been officially added into the store, but that's not everything that's available for Craft. So this is one place to look. Probably a lot of Craft 2. Yeah, people have started tagging it with Craft 2 as well. It looks like a little bit. And I've been tagging with Craft CMS plugin, and then also Craft 3 when it's Craft 3.
Yep. So this is a place to look to see if there's something like that's similar to what you want to build,
right?
And then you can start there.
Yeah, and the only reason I said that it can be good and it can be bad. I mean, I'm not dissing anyone. I'm just saying that everyone's learning, and I've definitely looked at some code where I've gone down the road they went down, and I'm like, oh my god, I think we took the wrong turn somewhere. But that happens with stuff that I've written too. Something I say all the time is that if you don't look at something you wrote a year ago and think it sucks, you're probably not learning enough, right?
Right, you're not growing at all. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
And that's another point. Like I've talked to a number of people that maybe they've written a plugin, but they don't want to publish it because they're like, oh, I don't. Maybe the code's not so good or whatever. The only thing I'd say to that is, I've seen a lot of just hellacious code that is in shipping products that you use every single day. Like, no, believe me, some of the stuff, like it would just amaze you. So I wouldn't feel bad about that. And then also, just from my own personal opinion, like, yes, I enjoy it when someone says, nice job, or you did well on this. But I've never learned anything from someone saying nice job. I've learned something from when someone points something out to me that maybe I didn't do well.
Right.
And if you have written a plugin, publish it. And if someone looks at it and tells you how you could do something better, that's awesome. You've just gotten free consulting. So don't have that be a mental barrier either. We all write crap code every day, and the way that we get better is in part by other people telling us how we could do better. So don't worry about it. Yeah.
Well, let's look at my plugin, and then we can look at my crap code, and we can talk about maybe things that we can do different, or just kind of talk through it a little bit.
Right.
So this is the Contact Form Plus, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what we have is, let me just find, let's see, 1 second. find that window. Oh, here it is. I got a lot of windows here. I feel like, all right. So like just like a real simple contact form, you submit it and it goes to a 404 because I don't have that template, but that's okay. And then in the CMS, I have a contact form channel, which has, you know, entries, and it basically just feeds that in. It's super simple. There's not a lot to it. It does have some settings here that I've created that I didn't have initially because I just had it all hard coded right in the code, right? I was just mapping like the form field to the section fields and then just saving it and then being done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I realized, well, the next step to making this be like usable by other people is to allow them to then, you know, stop hard coding the section ID, and so allow them to choose which section they want to use. And right now, so my next step was, all right, I'm going to determine beforehand that there's going to be these 4 fields in the forms. Obviously, this is already limited, right? This already kind of sucks, like in terms of like being usable to a lot of people. And then I have the, these are the field handles that I have entered in here. And so then on the back end, if I can find the code, one second. Where are we on? Craft 2, right? This is all Craft 2, by the way, right now, this version. So let me pull this up really quick. So here's Contact Form Plus. And then on the back end, I'm basically, like I'm still sort of, like I'm like a half step in between hard coding and having that abstracted out into settings. Mm-hmm. So I'm setting an array of the form data and I'm just mapping it to whatever these fields are that you have plugged in, and it's getting it from these. So it's still kind of like halfway in between, and I'm kind of stuck on how do I make this like truly flexible to where you could have like a contact form with as many fields as you wanted, and then on the back end you can configure that.
All right, so I have an idea. Oh, okay.
Okay, no, I was gonna say, so one of the problems that I ran into, and I think is maybe a limitation, is that the first party contact form only supports name, email, and subject, I think. Is that right? As distinct fields?
Like that. Yeah.
And then there's the message field, which then you can turn into an array and sort of add like other fields to it. So it's flexible, but it's also not, you know, it's hard to know like what people have. Like I can't just like, you know, check in like the contact form database table, like what are the defined fields, like, and then let's map them. That doesn't exist. So anyway, so you said you had an idea, so I'd like to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing that I'd say is that when I am looking at doing the plugin settings, I start by making a config.php, right? Which is just a little file that is going to sit in your plugins directory, and I put all the settings in there, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason I do it that way is, and this became like a formalized thing with Craft 3, is that then allows people to override the settings via a file that they can check into their Git repo, and also in a multi-environment way, so that, you know, let's say for a particular, let's talk about your contact form. Let's say that there's a company that, you know, almost every site they produce has a contact form, and they have their very specific fields that they have in there. Well, if you support this config.php thing, they can do the settings once in there, right? And then on every new site that they make, they just copy that file over, right? And boom, all the settings are defaulted to the way that they want it. They don't have to mess with the GUI to kind of figure it out. So I always start from there, where the settings go into a config.php, and if people want, they can put that in their craft config folder, And that will automatically in Craft 3, that will be merged in with the database settings. Like you don't have to do anything.
Okay, so it's automatic in Craft 3.
It just works, and it's in a environmental friendly way, so that, you know, staging could have different settings and production and all that kind of good stuff. And it's just a nice thing to give to people as a basis. But in terms of the specific problem you have here, like go to, yeah, like you'll see that's the old Craft 2 one, but even in the Craft 2 one, you know, if they want, they can set all this stuff here, and they don't have to ever mess with the GUI to do any of this stuff, right?
Okay.
But go back to your the settings page for your plugin.
Okay, sure. There we are.
So, and the way you approach this is, I think, a really natural way. What if you approached it from the opposite point of view, where you select the channel that you want it to go into, and then you could display all of the channel fields that are available, and then you would type in the post data name that you need from the form. You see what I'm saying? Like do it backwards from the way that you're doing it here. The idea being that you're kind of changing what's available based on what is in the user editable form on the back end. You know what I mean?
Right. So I would choose this. This
Yep.
it would then populate a list of the fields that are assigned to that. And again, like I'm assuming that there's a single entry type, right? We're not even getting into entry types at this point.
Right. Which is fine. I mean, it's a fine assumption to make on anything. You know, there's a scale you have to keep in mind.
Right.
But if you did it this way, let's say that there's another person that, you know, what they really need to have is you know, I don't know, a pager number or something like that, right? they can just, well, I know we're going back to like the 80s, 90s, you know, whatever. Right? First thing I thought of, whatever. They can define it in their section, because the section knows what data you want to keep, right? And that may be a subset of the data that's coming in from the contact form. Right. But we can never store more in the section than what is available there. So what if we present it as a default is the reverse, where you select a section, it lists the fields that are available in that section, and then you can put in, you know, the name of the incoming post thing that you need to map it from, right? And presumably whoever's making that form, they're going to know what all of those custom, you know, post parameters are, you know, you can just copy and paste them in. It, just kind of a different way of thinking about it, because if you did it that way, the settings here would be somewhat dynamic from the point of view, like it would be different depending on which section you've chosen and what was in there. And then on the front end, you can just, you know, make sure that you are passing down the appropriate fields, right?
Right. So not to get too like far in the weeds, because I'm not able to code this fast enough to show it, but would you do it with a, like where it would create more of an output like this, or would you do it with the table?
Use a table.
Use the table. Okay. So if not anybody's familiar with, trying to think of what add-on quickly has that, or what settings. Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head where that would be, but
I think in locales might. I know in Craft, I don't know. My brain is so fried. I've been doing so much Craft 3 stuff, like I don't remember where any. Yeah, no, that's not it.
No, it used to be in. I know right now it's in the Craft 3 when you're editing a section, you can toggle sites on and off.
Yeah. Anyway, whatever. It's a table.
Yeah, but anyway, everybody knows, right, where you can just add rows of. Yeah. So that's what we would probably. That's what I would want to use here then.
Yeah, and the reason is that one of the types that you can have in there is a heading type.
Right.
So you could list the name of the handle like in along the side vertically, in a way that it's clear that they can't edit it, but it would still be there in the table. You know.
Right. Right.
And I would only be using a table because, you know, it's a little more convenient.
Right.
In this case, you're not really going to want to add or delete anything from it. I mean, I guess you could, but there's no point since you're auto-populating it.
Yeah.
You're determined to find that damn table.
Yeah, I know. Like you use it 100 times when you're working in Craft 3.
Yep.
So anyway, all right, that's good. So that's a, you know, a really good point is going back to like problem solving and kind of knowing like how to solve the problem is sometimes flipping the problem around and approaching it from another way. And
yeah, like and I'm only approaching this from the point of view, like if I'm going to use this thing,
right.
You know, it would be really nice if I didn't have to go back and forth between the section and copy and paste the field handles out. It would be really nice if it just, I pick the section, you show me the fields that are in those sections, and I can just plop in the post data that comes in and what should be mapped, you know?
Right.
Because that's like, this is something, as you were mentioning before, there's no way for you to know what's going to be in this, the way the contact form plugin works. There's no real easy way for you to know ahead of time what the data is coming in, right? Mm-hmm. But you can know the data that is in the section, right? So right. Why not, you know? Why not auto-populate what you can? I mean, in theory, if you really wanted to, if you want to make this thing just absolutely awesome, you can, you're going to hate me, but you can point it at, you can have them put in like the URI to the public page, and you can parse the DOM and you can parse stuff out. I mean, you could do it.
Yeah. That would be the pro version, right?
It's definitely feasible. But that's a situation where, you know, to what gain, really? Right. It's not a big deal to necessarily set this stuff up once. And that's the other thing, is that getting back to what I mentioned earlier about the config.php, if you do let them configure this in a flexible way, they can set it up once. And they're not going to have to go through this, you know, population thing every time. You know? Right. Assuming they use the same naming from thing to thing, you know. Right.
All right. That's great. That's really good feedback. And like, as you can see, the code here, like this used to be like where settings is, like that was basically just kind of hard coded, right? With the name. So this is kind of like in an in-between step. And then all I'm doing is, you know, again, I'm just saving the entry here. Like I'm still like hard coding the author just to the admin, to the first the user, turning off that it's enabled. I just chose to disable every entry because I didn't want them to ever accidentally be displayed on the front of the site, even though you would actually have to code it to say like show these, but I never wanted that to happen. So I just disabled it by default.
And this type of stuff is, again, exactly the type of stuff that I would throw into a config.php. Okay. So that, you know, there's nothing wrong with hard coding stuff, right? But if we quote unquote hard code it in a config file, then people can change it, you know? Right. So you could have like a, you know, default props or something like that, could be an array. And then people could put in any key value pairs for what should be in there, you know? Okay. You have like default props, author ID 1, enabled false. And then they can put literally anything that they want in there, and it will then pull that in and suck it down. See what I mean? Yep. So, yeah. All
right. Let's see. Anything? I think that's probably, I mean, it's a pretty simple plugin on the, there, you know, there's nothing like in terms of like template code with this, because it's all happening behind the scenes with the, well, here's a question, Andrew. In my main plugin file, just in the init method is where I am actually like trying to, or I'm using on before send event. This is in Craft 2. Yep. Is that the proper place to do that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right.
I mean, the init method is it's a yeism, and it's also been around in a lot of other object-oriented frameworks, and it's basically just a way for you to set, when your object is created, the first thing it does is it calls this PHP magic construct method. And then in Ye, that when that's done, that calls your init method, right? So it's just giving you a way to set up anything that you need to set up. And listening to an event like this is exactly the type of thing that you would want to do in that. Yeah,
okay,
for sure. Yeah.
And I also have this check here, and I think I did this because I didn't want this to run if there wasn't any settings set yet.
Right.
Is this like an acceptable way of handling this, where like if something isn't set, I just want to bail on basically the whole plugin?
Yeah, the only thing I would do there is I would log something, because then, there's some poor guy in Iowa who's going to be using your plugin, and why is this damn thing not working? I keep submitting it, and nothing's working, and he's pouring through the log files. He's trying to find some reason why it's not working. And I think it's whenever there's a failure state, I think it's always nice to log something,
okay,
so that people can then, they can cruise the log file and they can say, oh, that's what's wrong. Or if you're the plugin developer and you're supporting someone, and maybe they're less technically knowledgeable than you are, you can say, send me your log file, right? Mm-hmm. And then you, as presumably an expert on the plugin that you wrote, will be able to handle support a lot easier, because you can just go through the log file and you can see what's going on.
Right. All right. So let's see. Let me just pull up my notes really quick. And
you can even, like, depending on the severity, you can even just throw an exception, right?
Okay.
Like if you consider this thing like just so fundamentally broken that it should not proceed, throw an exception, and then they'll know.
Yeah.
Their page is not working. They'll know that something's wrong. And a lot of times that's better than, and it's really kind of a judgment call in terms of the severity of the error. Is this something I should just log, or is it so fundamental that, kind of like Lord of the Rings, you shall not pass, just throw an exception and forget it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, this is probably a little bit too, it's probably failing a little bit too quietly here, like for other people.
Right.
Okay.
Ryan, this is like not talking about your feelings. Okay? This is the programming equivalent of you being all like pent up and angst ridden inside and just not talking about your feelings. Okay. You gotta let it out, Ryan.
This is my New Jersey solution for this not working.
Yeah, forget about it.
Exactly. That's what my log message is going to be. All right. So let's, someone was asking, do you want to step through the plugin factory, Andrew? Do you think that would be helpful to create one and go through it, or it's a lot of boilerplate code?
Well, I do want to give a suggestion that you are already taking, but maybe some other people are not.
Okay.
And how do I then, all right, I'm going to share my screen. My number one, look at other people's code, right? Mm-hmm. See how they attack the problem. Number two, at least in my opinion, start at Plugin Factory, generate a scaffolding, see how all kind of the pieces fit together. And then number three is use PHP Storm. Okay. And I know editors, it's like a religious battle, but for the purposes of developing PHP code, there is nothing like PHP Storm, right? There just isn't. And the reason why I want to show this is you can see here that it's complaining about your code, right?
Right.
This is because of I've got my default settings for the way all of the code should be formatted, and it lints it and it does all that stuff, and they may be different from yours, right? I am actually using a slightly tweaked version of what Pixel and Tonic uses, right?
Okay.
I figured they're writing the CMS. I might as well do things the way they're doing it, might as well, right? So the reason why I think that if you're doing plugin development, you should use PHP Storm. I'm going to show you 3 examples of why I think that you should do this. And all right, so first of all, I've got this code here. It's complaining about certain formatting things. It doesn't like the fact that you're using spaces here, right? It's a stylistic thing. Doesn't matter. This is the same reason why a lot of people are adopting Prettier, which is something that will run and you can give it a config file and it makes sure that everyone in the team is formatting stuff in a similar way. Mm-hmm. And this is the kind of thing where it doesn't matter the specifics of what you are doing. What really matters most is that everyone is agreeing to something, right? So that when you go in and you look at the code, things are kind of done the way that you would expect it. So the number one reason why I would say use PHP Storm for this stuff is we can just go reformat code and boom, it's going to reformat everything to my particular standards. And I write stuff all the time that, sometimes it's formatted to my standards, so sometimes it's not, whatever. I just, use it. And this is telling me that there's no PHP doc for this thing, which is a doc block. So we can fix that, and we can just say, update the comment, and boom. Now we've got @param array options. It's in the comment block. Another fantastic thing is, let's say that you decided that, options really isn't the best name for this thing. You can just go to refactor code, and you can say options here. And you'll notice it's changing it in the doc block. It's changing it here. It's changing it everywhere that I'm using it, right? Fantastic from a developmental point of view. And you can even do fun stuff like, the refactoring code is just ridiculous. Like, let's say that this is I'm writing a function and it gets really big and there's a whole lot of code in there. Maybe it should be in its own separate method, You can then just tell it to refactor stuff out to another method, refactor, boom. It took the code that was in here, created a method called another method, put the code there, and it has this calling that code, right? Just awesome from a code refactoring point of view. And that also works globally in your project. If you decide that, get is just not really descriptive, I really should change this thing. You can rename it to get this, or let's make it get this, right? And it will scan for usages of that everywhere in your code, and it will refactor the whole damn thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Have you ever refactored anything by hand and
awful.
Have run into all sorts of regression errors? Then why this is nice.
And that's the thing, is there are a lot of people that they will want to clean up their code and make it better, but they don't do it because it's just a pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. This makes it a whole lot easier to do that kind of stuff. So, okay, that's great. A lot of editors can do a lot of really cool stuff. The number one reason why I think you should do it is this. It's craft. Look at what's happening while I'm typing this.
Yep.
It's auto-completing. So here's every service that craft uses. So I don't remember, to get the sections. I don't remember exactly what it is. It knows about all of this stuff. If you have the Symfony plugin installed, it actually analyzes your entire project and will pull all this stuff in. And the crazy part is, and Patrick, who I think is in chat, kind of pulled this out. He dared to go where no man had gone before and decided to try something that we didn't know if it would work. But it also works in your templates. So if you're writing Twig code, you can do craft, app,
and everything, all the available services,
everything. And it's just so incredible. So incredible for, forget about the Twig part of doing stuff. When you are, I just realized I was really small and probably no one saw it. When you're coding stuff in Craft, the fact that it will give you all of this is just amazing. And it will tell you all the parameters that are expected, and then you can jump around to code. Like, let's say I'm using craft get sections. I don't really know how to. I'm going to do get section by handle, right? So it's telling me that I'm not passing the parameters I should be in here, so we need a handle of some kind. Tells me that this is a section handle type. And then also maybe I need to know a little bit more about exactly what this thing is doing. Well, you can just command click on it and just jump, right to the exact place where it is in the code. And something you mentioned early on is that when you're learning stuff, you look at other people's code. Well, the fact that you can just jump around in Craft's code this easily and see how they're doing everything, super, super helpful.
Especially with like a framework like Yi, because everything's abstracted out into their own methods, and so you may have like a stack of methods
right.
that you have to jump down into to actually see where the thing is happening.
Right, and then the final thing, and I'm actually not going to demo this here because I know this is kind of coming off as an ad for PHP Storm. I get no kickbacks. Okay, I'm telling you that as something that has made me like I used to think that some of these guys that were writing amazing PHP code were just gods. And then I found out, no, they're using PHP Storm, right? I mean, that's what it is for real. But this is something that is just more than anything else has made it easier to develop plugins, has made it less error prone, and has allowed me to keep my sanity. The other thing that I'm not going to show, but I'm going to tell you about is you can also set breakpoints, right? Like the kind of the old school way of debugging is, you'll do like craft, dump and die.
Oh, I didn't know dump and die was, okay. I just learned something.
Yeah, craft DD, what it does is it dumps whatever the variable is, and then it just kills
the app, yeah.
So you'll get a readout. So it's fine. I still do it sometimes. Yep. It's a quick and dirty way to look at stuff and diagnose things. But whenever you have a really intractable problem, in PHP Storm, you can set a breakpoint, right? And then you can run your web app. And when it hits this piece of code, the web app stops, and you can actually look at, who called this thing, what the parameters are, what's going on, and you can just do some absolutely amazing stuff with it. And you can even set a condition. Like, let's say this is a loop, and I only want it to break when I'm at, it only doesn't work when I'm at the 100th index in the loop. You can put in any executable condition code you want in here, and it will only break then, right? I use this, not that often, but when you need it, like, it's invaluable to be able to look at the call stack, inspect all the variables, like do everything. So that would be
Andrew, Derek asked that this requires the X debugger module enabled?
Yes, it does require that in your local dev environment, Xdebug needs to be up and running. So yes, that's how it works. That's how it hooks in. I use Homestead for my local dev. There's an article up there on setting that up, and it tells you exactly how to get it to work. Valet, I believe, sets everything up so it just works. I don't know offhand, but you can get this working with any local dev environment. But yes, you need Xdebug installed to do all the breakpoints and tracing and all that kind of stuff. So this would be my number 3 suggestion. Like, if you're going to do any amount of serious, quote unquote, serious PHP development, yes, it's PHP Storm is a little clunky, but oh my God, does it save you time? I mean, it's, I'll be honest, it's not as sexy as like VS Code and some of these other ones, but the functionality that it provides is ridiculous. It really is off the charts ridiculous.
And it's paid. You can, I think they give you like a 30-day trial if you download it, and they even let you pay monthly. It's a, it's a subscription.
Right.
I don't know if there's a lifetime option. I don't think so. But
pro tip, if you're willing to live on the edge, you can get it for free.
Oh, if you're on the beta releases, or
so if all you want to use, if you don't mind being on the cutting edge, I forget what they call them. They got a special name for them, but it's like a preview track, or I don't know, something like that. But then you'll get like the latest everything, and it's free, because basically they're like, well, this is a way for us to get testers, Right. And so that's something else that you can do. I pay for the subscription. I just do it yearly, whatever it is. I don't even know what it is. I think it.
It's not much. I think it's like $8 or $9 per month if you do it monthly.
Yeah.
The thing I like about monthly is that if you get through the trial, you still want to pursue it, you can just, go monthly until you say like this, like I'm just going to use this, and you just start paying yearly.
Yeah.
So,
but if you want a way, like, especially let's say maybe you've, we had like some, like 40-something% of people said that they had written a plugin before. Maybe the plugin that you wrote was for Craft 2 and you're learning Craft 3 and you're not sure where everything is and you don't know what the APIs are. I mean, the amount of time that stuff like this saves you is it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. So Patrick and Donovan jumped in and said, and someone else, EAP. So it's the early access program.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. I knew it was something, I'm not going to try and convert someone over to this. I'm just saying, if you're doing PHP dev, this thing is the number one thing that has made me better and saved me time. Like number one by far.
Yeah.
By far.
So I'm a big Sublime Text user. Just have the muscle memory for working in it, especially with Git. I have a package that I use where it's just, I'm just on the keyboard in the same app the entire time. But I think when I'm just doing like just straight implementation, I tend to be in Sublime Text, but for plugin development, actual real PHP work, then I'll be in PHP Storm. It's really nice.
PHP Storm is crazy because I feel like I know 10% of this thing. I really do. You can use it as a database client, so you can connect to local or remote databases, whether they are MySQL or Postgres or any number of other things, and you can do that right in the app. There's a terminal built in. It's got built-in support for Composer, so it will install your Composer stuff for you. It has built-in, I mean, it's just, it literally is insane the amount of stuff that's in there. It's really neat.
And there's a pretty good Laracast video that Jeffrey did.
How to be awesome in PHP Storm.
Yeah, here, I'll drop it in the chat as well. Let's see.
And this is a case of Jeffrey Way is an amazing communicator and also an amazing coder. Mm-hmm. So to see how he uses it is a great way to get a jump start. And he also leads you through kind of configuring it in a way that you're going to feel comfortable if you're a Sublime user. Right. So that's the other thing with PHP Storm. Everything is a preference. Like you can map every keystroke to anything that you want.
Yep. Yeah, and he's got a real nice, I think I originally, when I first set up PHP Storm, I used his me too. His course. He's got really good stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing, like I said earlier, that I did is I installed the coding defaults that Pixel and Tonic uses, and you can get that from their GitHub repo. Just go to github.com/graphcms, and it's listed there somewhere.
All right.
And again, I know that ostensibly we're talking about plugin development. And this sounds like a marketing pitch for PHP Storm. if I didn't think that it was that important from my development point of view, then I wouldn't say it. But it really has been quite impressive.
Agreed. All right, let me take over again here really quick. Drop some stuff in, share a screen. So I think we're going to kind of like head towards wrapping up, Andrew. And
we didn't go over Plugin Factory. We didn't even show people how to make a plugin, but that's okay. I mean, hopefully the higher level discussion was interesting and useful for people to hear.
Yeah. So there's definitely the Plugin Factory. I think packages might be like a whole another thing.
Let's talk about it real quick because we can cover that real quick. Right?
Okay, let's talk about packages. So talk about packages, why it matters, especially in Craft 3.
Oh, you're talking to me. Oh,
I'm talking to you.
Okay. So we create our plugin. We put it out on GitHub. That's great. What Craft 3 is now using something called Composer. And Composer is a package manager for PHP. If you, back in the day, you use Bower, maybe to pull down some packages, or now you're using NPM, It's directly analogous to those, but it is for the PHP ecosystem, right? So, and currently in the RC releases of Craft, that's the only way to install it, right? You create a project, and then you do Composer install, and it installs all of these packages. And, interestingly enough, Craft CMS itself is just a package.
Mm-hmm.
And the plugins that we write are also Composer packages, right? So Composer needs a way to find these packages, right? It can't magically scan every single GitHub repo on the planet to figure out what's what. So that's where packages comes in. It's a directory of PHP packages. So after you've created your plugin and you want to make it available to people, what you need to do is then create an account on Packagist, and you take the URL to your GitHub repo, and you go to submit on Packagist, you paste in the URL, and it will go and scrape all the information from your GitHub repo, and now it's in Packagist, right? The only other step you're going to want to set up is you're going to want to go to your GitHub repo, go to settings, go to integrations and services, and you add a webhook for Packagist. And you'll need your API key from Packagist that's in your profile settings. You put that in there, and then what ends up happening is any changes to GitHub, it will automatically pull the metadata down, so it'll know about all that stuff. The other thing you should be doing is in your Git client, you should be tagging your releases. So whenever you do a release, issue a tag. Packagist will read those. That is what allows people to then do Composer install, vendor name / package name. Composer then goes out to Packagist, finds it, then it using the meta information, it goes to GitHub, it pulls everything down, and that's how it all works. And that's an extra step that you did not need to do when you were doing stuff for Craft 2. Now, interestingly, Pixel and Tonic is actually running their own private Packagist repo. So technically, if the only place you're ever going to make this thing available is in the plugin store, and you only care that people can install it from the plugin store, technically you don't need to set up anything on Packagist. But I would still kind of recommend doing it, because there are people like me that I prefer to just install everything via the composer.json. So I'd like to be able to just put all the plugin stuff in there and have it kind of just work.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. And, we just set you up, right? I mean, just earlier today, we got you up on Packagist, and now you're rocking it.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, did you write up anything about setting up in Packagist yet, or not yet? Have you?
I think so. I've got an nystudio107.com/blog. There's a blog on creating a Craft 3 plugin.
Okay.
And I know I mentioned it. I don't know if I did like a screenshot tutorial. It would make a great Majingo video. Just saying.
I was just gonna say, maybe we can work together just to make sure that I'm covering it properly, and then I can put something up that'll help people step through that process.
But
it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard, but there's just certain steps you want to make sure you take so it all works. Like we ran into a problem where I didn't update the Composer file with the latest version. Right. And so Packagist was only grabbing my 001. So there's just a couple things. It's
one of those things that's it's not like mentally hard, but it's hard from the point of view of, if you don't know the steps, it's hard.
Right.
You know what I mean? The one other thing that I think we should probably kind of talk about, Ryan, and I don't want to keep you too long, but whether we're going to make a plugin at all, if we're doing it for Craft 3.
Good point. You're talking about the services being available in the template via craft.app, but then there's also, you mentioned earlier, modules as well. Yeah.
So as you saw earlier when I was doing when I was using PHP Storm to kind of be awesome, hopefully my screen is visible, right?
It is. Yep.
So I can do craft.app. Now, in Craft 2, there was a very limited subset of things that Pixel and Tonic thought that that you might need in your templates. And in Craft 3, it's technically still a subset, but it's a huge subset, right? So if we go like get, let's do config, right? If we do craft.config, this is actually giving us the actual config service, right? So the actual service that you're going to be talking to when you're a plugin developer is all here. And so you can access any part of it. So the important thing to note here is that there's a ton of functionality that is now available in your templates. So there are certain things that maybe you had to write a plugin that was just a thin accessor to something because it wasn't exposed in Craft 2. In Craft 3, it very well may be there. Like you may be able to do any of this stuff, and you can do crazy stuff like if you have a DB query, you can ask it for the raw SQL, and like you can do some pretty amazing stuff in your templates. So when you're thinking about writing a plugin, you first might take a look and see, is it like a very simple thing? Is it a thin layer for trying to expose some functionality? And you may not even need it, right? Now, the stuff we discussed earlier in terms of if you're bundling up a whole lot of complicated functionality, obviously this doesn't take care of that, right?
Right.
But for simple plugins that, were just accessors for stuff, you may not even need to make a plugin. And then the other reason you may not need a plugin is in Craft 3, there's a concept of modules, right? And this is actually a Ye2 concept of modules. And modules are just bundled up pieces of functionality that are kind of logically grouped together, just like a plugin. And actually, if you look at Craft's plugin class, it extends the Ye module class, right? So every plugin is a module, right? Now, what's the difference between the two? Modules are super, super appropriate for per site things or functionality that is specific to a single site. Because one of the things you can't do with modules that you can with plugins is you can't uninstall them, right? They're just there, right? But if it's functionality that is required for your website to work, it's not such a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing at all that is always there. And there's some other things that you get for free in plugins that you can still do in a module, but you got to do a little more work. Things like if you want a settings page, well, I mean, you can do it, but you're going to kind of have to roll your own. There's no calls that are inherent in a module to present a settings page or an admin CP section. There's no concept of that in a module. You can still do it, but it takes a little bit more work. The line that I would draw is if it's something that you're going to need on many different sites and it's going to be the same thing on all those different sites, that's a plugin, right? If it's something that is very specific in terms of functionality to this one site, then I'm going to make a module, right? And so an example, I was actually recently contacted to do some custom work for a client that they needed to talk to an external database to pull stuff in and display it in their templates. And it certainly could have been done as a plugin, but there's no reason for it to be a plugin. There's no reason for anyone on the back end to ever see this thing, to ever accidentally uninstall it, whatever. So I just made it a module, and you can do the same stuff in Craft, or same stuff you do in a plugin in Craft. So you can create field types, you can create admin sections, you can create element types, like you can do anything. You can do all this stuff in a module that you can in a plugin. There are just certain things you get for free in a plugin that you don't in a module, right? So, and you were mentioning that you had written some stuff, some custom stuff for some sites. If it's very specific to that site, you might just want to make a module. And pluginfactory.io, one of the drop downs on there is module. You pick that, it will generate the module framework for you. And it's very, very similar to what you get when you generate a plugin. There's just a couple of things that are slightly different about it. But the real interesting thing from my perspective is that the transition from Craft 2, yeah, right there, API version, if you pull that down on Plugin Factory, there you go, Craft CMS module, boom, right? You just fill it all in and you get all the same, types that you can build and all that kind of stuff. There's no purchasables because there's no Commerce 2 yet, but that's another story. But the interesting thing for me, the transition from Craft 2 to Craft 3 from a plugin development point of view, is that in Craft 2, Pixel and Tonic kind of created this proprietary layer for plugins to work in. And, that was all nice and kind of made sense at the time. But what they ended up doing with Craft 3 is they stripped a lot of that away. And really what you're doing when you're developing a plugin for Craft is you're developing something for Yi2, like the Yi2 framework, right? So Yi2 has a concept of modules. Well, so does Craft because it's a Yi2 app, right? Mm-hmm. And plugins are just modules that you can uninstall and have an inherent concept of settings that are built into them. But in doing this, in kind of stripping away this custom layer, it's really interesting because Craft 3 can be used as a traditional CMS, but it also is much more accessible as a content management framework, where maybe you would use Laravel in the past to build some custom thing. Well, if you're building some custom thing that you want a really nice admin CP interface to it, you can build it in Craft 3, and you can build the custom part of your app as a module.
Right?
You get all the admin CP stuff for free, and then you get all the goodness of developing a custom Yi2 app, which is a very, very capable framework. And you can be doing all sorts of, there's all sorts of custom Laravel sites that might be better served if you need the kind of functionality that Craft gives you for free, might be better served developed using Craft 3 in a module,
Good point. Yeah.
So that is the other reason. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so between the enhanced capability of our Twig templates in Craft 3
right.
and then also the ability to use modules, I think what I like about having the Craft services available in the template now is that it gives people who maybe aren't interested in writing a plugin or don't feel like they can or whatever, the ability to still do a little more powerful things in the templates. And I already feel like that the Twig templates are already, so powerful to where you don't, sometimes you don't need anything, anything else, right? You just, because you can do it all in there. It's a little sort of mini sort of encapsulated little programming, system.
Yep. It definitely is, but it's also the thing where you have to know when to step back, right? Like I've seen some people write some amazing stuff in Twig, but Jesus, like it should not have done it. Like I'm very impressed that they were able to do it, but at some point, Twig was really meant to be a way to take data and then present it, right? Like the business logic stuff, we don't necessarily want that to be in Twig. And then also, it's a big gain. Like we all talk about writing dry code, right? Being able to read it or whatever. It's a big gain when you're able to take a problem and distill it down to something that is compartmentalized so it can be reused as a module or as a plugin. It's a huge gain for me when I'm developing stuff. And this has happened so many times. Like there's a website that we did where we really needed some very fancy custom redirect stuff, right? So instead of solving that just for that website, I came out with the Retour plugin that let you do dynamic redirects based on some key data that was in the entry. So if you had like some horrible old website that the URL was page equals 92, right? You could then take that and map that to its new entry in Craft and do the redirects intelligently, stuff like that. But the real point here is that instead of just solving it for that one thing, I said, hey, this is a generic problem. We can factor this out, think about it from a forest perspective, and make it something that can be reused on many of either my projects or other people's projects, right?
Yep.
So while you can do a ton more in Twig, just know when to stop.
That's a good point.
It's like being at a bar. Yes, but know your limits and know when to stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So let's, we're hitting on 90 minutes. So let's wrap up. I just want to bring up your blog here for everybody. Tons of stuff, especially on craft. I mean, it's going to come up in the Google search results or DuckDuckGo or whatever you use. So check out Andrew. If you don't already know Andrew's stuff, I'm sure a lot of you already do. Check that out too. I'm going to put this video up onto the YouTube channel and as well as on the Majingo.com website. So if anyone wants to come and revisit it and see some of the stuff that we talked about, you can do that. So thank you, Andrew, for coming and hanging out for 90 minutes with me today and sharing some of these nuggets of info. I appreciate it.
Yep, you got it. Ryan, thank you very much for having me on here. And, maybe we'll do it again. Who knows?
Yeah, it'll be fun to do it again. All right, thanks everybody for coming and hanging out. We are going to sign off. I'll talk to you guys later.